Well, good morning, guys. This is Bob Lullard from the Cornish Crusade, just going through another project that I've been working on over the last couple of years. And this one is actually blurring the lines of what I have worked on and what I'm working on now. So as you can see, there's only 5 chaps in front of me here, just 28mm gentlemen, probably in a colour scheme and in uniforms that are, again, unfamiliar to you. Well, I may have mentioned in a previous video, in a couple of previous videos, that one of the projects that I'm focusing on is the imagination or fictitious country of Gepsmark, and that I have a history of that country worked out really from a kind of Dark Ages, early medieval period, right the way up to the 19th or early 20th century, in a kind of fantastical fantasy setting. So these models are, if you will, from the earlier end of that time frame, that kind of Dark Ages, really was inspired by some kind of not just the late Roman uniforms or the history of the later Roman Empire in the West and in the East, but also those stories of medieval England, really from the Anglo-Saxon period right up until the Barons' Wars. I just thought that would be really interesting to play around with as a historical setting, and also it would be really fun to play around with as a fantasy setting. So I got to making a little while ago and painting up these 5 models. As you can see, there's nothing much to them. They are all armoured. They're wearing chainmail or scale armour, and as you can see, 2 of them are carrying long pikes. 2 of them are carrying hand weapons. One of them has a sword and the other one has quite a cruel looking flail. And then the chappie in the middle has a bow and arrow. Just doing a bit more of a close-up of these models. As you can see, again, we have 2 pikemen, 2 men with hand weapons and 1 archer. These test models are made primarily from Fireforge Russian models. As you can see, 3 of the models, their base bodies are Fireforge medieval Russians. That's where a lot of the chainmail and the scale mail have come from. But the man with the sword and the man with the flail, their base bodies are actually Warlord Games Republican Romans, or Caesar's Romans. I just thought that even though it looks a little bit incongruous to have perhaps alongside more medieval chainmail, I just thought that it looked very nice and I wanted to convert those models that I had laying around. So we've got those chaps there. The arms for the archer, I believe, come from the Oathmark light elf warrior sprue, so the ones that aren't wearing armor. And the pikes for the pikemen I've actually liberated from Warlord Games' pike and shot range of 28mm pike and shot infantry. So you get those models with muskets and those models with pikes. So I've taken a couple of the arms where they have charged pikes. I believe that that's the correct term. Heads are all from the Fireforge medieval Russians, apart from one of the pikemen, whose head actually comes from the Games Workshop Empire Flagellant sprue. I just thought that having a crazy old man carrying a pike would look suitably interesting. Now, there are only 5 of them here so far, but I thought recently that when I revisited this idea, I thought, actually, that's quite wonderful. I'd like to use that for a few games. And obviously, you can see in the background, there are a couple of games that I had ideas of using. So there are Nevermind the Billhooks, which is more of a War of the Roses game, but in a fantasy setting, might end up being suitable. We have The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King strategy battle game from 2003. It's a particular favorite of mine. I spent a lot of time playing that when I was younger, and I'd be really interested in revisiting that. And Dragon Rampant, of course, which is one of the more dominant fantasy games now from the Osprey Blue Book series. And then also we have in the corner here the War of the Ring, which is the mass battle version of the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. So perhaps if my collection increases to a certain size, then maybe I could bust out War of the Ring and see how that goes. Like I say, after I revisited this idea, I was quite inspired to go back to it. So I thought I would show you what I'm currently working on. I have another 11 warriors here. Yeah, I can still do my basic maths. That's another 11 warriors here to create 16 warriors total. Terribly sorry. I obviously need more sleep. But as you can see, they're all works in progress. I've been batch painting these all together. And in the front rank, you can see that there are two more gentlemen here with hand weapons, and we have two more gentlemen here with the pikes. We have three more archers at the back here, and then we have four men in the middle here carrying spears. And the idea is that at the end of having all of these painted, I will have 16 line infantry, and they will have four with hand weapons, four with spears, four with pikes, and four with bows and arrows. And these have really come from a wide array of different manufacturers. Like I say, the vast majority of them are still using the medieval Russian infantry from Fireforge games as their core bodies. It's also where a lot of the weapons have come from. However, some of them are also using, again, the Warlord Games Caesar's Romans or Republican Romans, which I've used them as the base for those models. And then a few of them also are using as a base for the models the Wargames Atlantic Late Roman Infantry. And so the idea is that the entire force will be wearing some kind of mail armor, whether it's scale mail or chain mail, and then there will be four, each armed with different weapons. I believe that the spears have all come from the Wargames Atlantic Late Romans range. And yes, so if I was ever to play a game like Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, then that would mean that I could have lots of different warriors armed with lots of different weapons that are all covered by the rules. With a game such as Dragon Rampant, I could lump all of the close combat armed models together to form a single unit. But yeah, so these are all kit bashes. There isn't one single range that I've created these models from. So there are kit bashes. They are all kit bashes made from Fireforge Medieval Russians, Wargames Atlantic Late Romans, and Goths. Some of the heads are from their Gothic range. There's even been a couple of items from the Oathmark Goblin range, which I will show you in a moment, including this chap's axe and shield arm. Warlord Games Republican Romans, of course, as I've already mentioned, and even, which I will show you in just a second, the old Games Workshop Tomb King range, because I was looking for some shields for these gentlemen, and I didn't really want to go with something that was very obviously Roman or very obviously Greek. I wanted to go for something that still spoke of that antiquity, perhaps the glory of a past empire, but now plunging into a dark age. And what I settled on, and I'll see if I can show this to you for the camera, is the old Games Workshop Tomb King's Warriors Shields. I have a fair few of these hanging around in my bits box for one reason or another, and I thought that this would be a perfect opportunity to use them. So if I was to, let me see, get this fellow here, and I was to put the shield on him, it's quite a big shield, but I think that that kind of makes sense. So not only is he heavily armed, he's also going to be very heavily armored. He will be, for certain, a tough nut to crack. Any force must have leaders. And to that end, I've also been painting up alongside the men at the back a captain and banner bearer. The captain's marked out by having a helm that I will be adding gold to, and also a cloak. I'm not sure what manufacturer that comes from, possibly the Oathmark Elves again. And then we have our banner bearer here. Looks like quite an old, frail chap, really. I'll probably paint him up with a grey moustache. And as you can see, his arms, again, come from the Oathmark Goblin sprue, but the top of the banner is a stylized one from the Tomb King's range. So it really has some of that ancient splendor attached to it, much in the same way that perhaps that a Roman Aquila would. But then I had these models lying around as well, and I decided that what better for this late antiquity, early Dark Ages force than a king. And this is another Fireforge miniatures model, or pair of models, and it represents King Baldwin of Jerusalem, both on foot and mounted. As you can see, he's quite a tall fellow, perhaps by the other people's standards. That's okay. It just means that he will be able to stand above the rest of the troops and be more noticeable. He's wearing a tabard and full from head to toe chainmail, and he wears that ornamental mask, which, as for the real King Baldwin of Jerusalem, was because he had been stricken with leprosy, I believe from birth, and as a result, it was one of the contributing factors, I believe, that killed him. But so that meant that, so history goes, or at least so the film Kingdom of Heaven goes, that he would always go out wearing this mask and was clad from head to toe, so no one could see his skin. And so I just thought that this would be a fantastic guy to paint up in those rich blues and bronzes and golds that I seem to be going for with these fantasy legionaries. And then, yeah, that he would be a fantastic king to lead them. The way that these were painted and will be painted when they're all finished is that the cloth comes from the Games Workshop contrast paint range, the Talassar blue colour. The chainmail is Citadel Miniatures paint range, Leadbelcher. The bronze, again, Games Workshop Citadel Miniatures paint, Balthazar gold. The gold will be the Retributor armour. The wood effects are painted using, again, contrast paint, Wildwood. Leather, contrast paint, Snakebite leather. And the clothes, which are underneath the robes, will either be, again, contrast, Agaros dunes, or Skeleton Horde. And then finally, the skin will be contrast, Guilliman flesh. So these models, not only will they work well for the history of Gepsmark, this imagination that I'm creating, really, a kind of setting for role-playing games and war games, but they might also do well for playing games of Lord of the Rings. You know, I know that the Games Workshop miniatures game, its artistic flair comes entirely from the Peter Jackson films, but if you wanted to do something that perhaps was a bit more book accurate, which looks a bit more Dark Age, if you look at some of the artwork that Tolkien drew or some of the art that other artists drew before the Peter Jackson films came along, then maybe it would work for that, and maybe it would just work for any kind of generic fantasy heavy infantry. But yes, so with these rules in front of me and these models on my painting table, I'm really looking forward to getting this small force created before adding perhaps some more to it. So that's all from me. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. My stomach is grumbling, so I reckon it's about time for lunch for me. So until the next video, God bless. Cheers.